women of color, especially in America.
Comorbidity, right?
Stop calling us exotic.
Right? I'm from Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
Yeah.
There is
I
no
hate that
thing
question. Where are you
exotic.
from?
I don't know about you guys.
I was at a funeral though, because that's where you're from. Like, can you reserve that, like, for?
Seriously.
God, it's just the worst question. And when I say Nebraska, or well, no, but like really,
Where are you from?
I find that like part of it, like half of that is like well-meaning white folk, and
It's
the other half is
curiosity,
like
I'm sure.
really racist folk. I don't know. Like,
it's
If you're 7 and you ask me, or are you 37 and asking me? Because it's that same kind of thing, like how much effort have you put into educating yourself before you bring these tired questions to me again? So I have a different reaction internally, but I try to have a similar external reaction. And I try to assume that all of these inappropriately timed and uneducated questions are coming from a good place. Sometimes they're not, and sometimes that assumption I make to protect myself. I deliberately do it, so I'm not gonna sit here and get mad and get into an argument with this ignorant person. I'm just gonna answer their question with the facts, you know. I'm gonna channel my mom, and not everybody here knows, and just, where are you from? Sioux Falls.
But there are also ways, I've read a different, there are a lot of resources nowadays also. And like, for example, with school starting, I realized that there were a lot of triggers for children. For example, even asking them, like, what did you do this summer? Like, some kids don't have the luxuries as others, you know, so there are ways that you can frame a question. So tell me a little bit about yourself, or, you know, instead of where did you come from, or where are you from, you know, like there are ways you can show interest in someone without being in their face about it that way as well.
One of the most irritating questions that I get, and I'm tired of it, South Dakotans, is the question of what African language do you speak, or what kind of African food do you like? First of all, Africa is a continent.
Yes.
It's not a country. And that's one of the questions that I often get that just irritates me. It just takes as little as like 30 seconds of Googling it, like, it's a continent, guys. It's not a country. I've even seen it in one of the PowerPoints in school. A teacher was presenting, it was something about, I don't know, what was it we were going over, but it had all the different countries. It was like a graph, and it had like all the different countries in Europe, United States, Canada, but then Africa was put in there as Africa. And I asked her, I was like, why is Africa put as a country? And you have all these other countries, why not put all these other countries as continent with Africa? So I feel like it's something that's like taught in school as well, you know, it's something that we need to take better care of, like we need to educate ourselves.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Okay, questions. I think Jackson, you had asked in the middle, if you want to go ahead and start.
Yes. It is rather convenient that the entire panel is women because I forgot your name, I'm sorry. Michaela brought up the portrayal of trans people in the media, and it got me thinking about how more often than not, whether it's trans or gay or people of color, it tends to be a focus on the men and the bad that men are doing, and how this kind of like ties into patriarchy and the intersections of that. I was hoping to hear everyone's perspective on things like patriarchy in the media and how women are underrepresented in some facets and overrepresented in others.
Thank you, Jackson.
You're not wrong. It's in the media, cis, heteronormative, male, white perspective. And I'm like, I'm none of those. Not perfectly. So quick, fast answer is, yeah, I agree with you that a lot of the stories that are boosted are from a perspective or from a reality that I don't connect to. So then I go to places like social media where I can actively find people that connect, that I can feel connected to. So yeah, I'm not looking to, I've got to do the extra work though. I've got to take the time and I've got to dig it out and I've got to figure out who's going to tell the story from a perspective that I can understand most like instinctually. It's just more work.
I think even like in movies or shows, you have shows where you present women that, like, let's say now, that are hardworking, have, you know, head of households, but like in workplace, they're presented as like, if they're very assertive, that they're, oh, she's a bitch, or why can't it be just a woman that's assertive, that's doing her job, that's trying to, like, take care of her household, and that's something that I have a huge issue with too, so.
I wonder, like, how much of that is tied into the lack of acceptance for trauma that's happened to white male. If you haven't been raped, you know somebody who's been raped. If you haven't been molested, you know someone in your family that has. And that's just a reality. There are people of color who have been dealing with these conversations because it's only been 150, 200 years since it started happening, that like these things have been happening to white people for thousands of years. And it's unfortunate, but the fact that a woman who gets lifted up in the media has to have gone through some kind of trauma to be a hero plays into the fact that white men are still perpetuating those expectations for what heroes are, because white women have thought they were heroes for so long that they don't even know that they've had to go through different traumas to get there. So I think that's a really good question, and I'm not sure how to answer it, but I that kind of really got me thinking about that, because there are in our societies there's a shift in control right now, and hopefully there will be a little equality more in the next 23 years, but right now we're still seeing that uncomfortability that you were talking about. The discomfort itself is going to lead to growth, but right now we're going to, like I said, you guys kind of need to break yourself down a little bit in order to deal with the traumas that exist in your genetics to begin with, because everything else just adds on to that once you're born.
I think Bell Hooks has a quote that talks about in toxic masculinity that the first victim is the man himself, that you have to break yourself first before you're able to go out and then cause harm. And I think, Allison, you've done an amazing job, and I deeply appreciate that, uplifting that it is something, this is about healing everybody together. And so looking at it that way, that you do have to do that work too, where that media does have that same, the way, I think, Danae, you talked at the very beginning that fetishization, that's such a fun word to say. And that hypersexualization, that's something that happens especially for, women of color. It's a big part of like the murdered and missing Indigenous women. We're coming up on Halloween, and everyone is going to go to the Halloween store, and you're going to see polka hottie costumes. That kind of stuff is intentional, and that part of that patriarchal culture that's harmful. And it's not just harmful to people that are directly targeted, but it's harmful to people that pretend not to see it because they're afraid that target will be turned onto their backs. And being able to recognize that, again, the only way we get free is that, we're all free. And I think that's Asada who says that, trying to attribute, almost everyone that I've quoted has been Black or Indigenous women. So I just want that to be completely clear that, when we do this work, that it is women of color that are truly leading it. And it's so important to center those voices in this work. So does anyone else want to respond to Jackson?
Someone talked about trauma as I think it's also important to think about what you see like on the media when it's related to women, and it's mostly always trauma. The vulnerable women, like the sexualization of women. If I'm not seen as Angelica with her traumas, I'm seen as Angelica like body. Like I'm not seen. Well, I don't know about that, but it's never past that, right? Why are you showing me, like you said, the superheroes, like the women that are powerful and assertive, that are doing something, and not that traumas don't allow you to become, I have to clarify, don't become powerful, but you know what I mean. It's just you're not showing past that, and then that it shows the world, or tells the world that women can be those things, right? That the only way we are of value is if we have a trauma to show, and I mean it doesn't have to be the case, right? So I think the narrative is also important, what they're sharing and what they're leaving out.
Yeah, it's really great. Does anyone else have any other questions?
I did have a second.
Let's see if anyone else does, and then we'll jump back to you, Jackson. Sounds good. You've got your second question.
Okay. So I assume everyone saw the video recently of the old white guy from downtown. Yeah. I was.
Danae, would you go ahead instead of Soto? I think there's some people in the back that haven't seen it either. I don't know if you want to explain it or if you want Jackson to explain it.
Yeah, I can explain it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nope.
Yeah. So recently there were two young black kids walking downtown, and this elderly white gentleman on a bike rode by, and he said something about having a gun on him, and clearly very threatening. And they were recording this, and
He used the N-word as well,
he
referring
did
to
refer
them.
with the N-word. It was very uncomfortable, but that's unfortunately the world we live in. And obviously this eventually got covered on KELOLAND and the Argus Leader and other places. And when I saw it, I was like, well, good for these news media outlets. They're saying that racism is bad, but at the same time, you know, there are also a lot of aspects of media that ignore more subtle forms of racism that isn't just, you know, an old white dude yelling racial slurs at black kids.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like to inquire about your perspectives on the difference in how more overt racism is portrayed in the media, whereas subtle racism isn't or is portrayed as not serious.
I get more likes if I comment or tag something, like somebody get your auntie. Someone's uncle over here is doing this. And then next thing you know, it goes viral. Like that's, it's literally like talking about how it personally affects people, and that itself drives, you know, like the want to actually expose it more. But, you know, with local media and stuff, I mean, just because they put this story out doesn't mean that they haven't put out all this other bullshit that is, you know, that ends up overshadowing the important conversation.
It's like literally the least you could do. Like clearly,
For 30 seconds, they, you know, they're running 30 seconds.
Well, let's check the box on to the next. No, what I recognize in my experience with that specific story, I posted it and I'm like, social media, embarrass this person, you know, destroy their life basically, and it worked. And huzzah, hooray, community, because that was a community effort. But what I also recognized is that I had people saying like, oh my gosh, this is so shocking. I can't believe such things are occurring. I am so sorry. I'm like, why are you so surprised? This is one video. It's an accident that they had their video camera, or there's a camera phone, smartphone, oh my gosh. It's an accident that they were able to record this one instance, and it's happening all the time, all over the place. Why are you clutching your pearls? Why don't you see this as a norm, just like I do? And it just brought to my mind again, like I move through this world differently than my friends do because of the way I look. So I'm not gonna speak to like how the media deals with overt racism versus subtle racism. I want to talk to how my just friends, the people I love and care about, deal with overt racism versus subtle racism. Like, are they also dropping the ball? My friends, I'm calling to task here to say, you saw this video, you reacted to this video, you commented on my Facebook page. Are you checking the box? Are you done now? Because guess what I have to deal with when I'm just moving around the state? When I call up to Aberdeen, I get shouted at in the hotel lobby and the staff does nothing. You know, like not you.
I know.
They disappointed me greatly in that moment because it made me understand, like, this is where we see the world differently in a very disappointing way.
And there is a level of consciousness that exists in that, that the definition of, you know, blatant and covert racism. You called the guy a gentleman.
Right.
With people like us.
Yeah, sorry
you know,
about that.
Let me further explain it though, because someone like us who have been exposed to these things and who see that guy as an old white man. That's how I would describe it, because there's a generation who are still perpetuating that racism. and we see them as old white people because they're over the age of being a baby boomer and so on and so forth. And this is a generation that we're slowly waiting to deteriorate because of the fact that they're still perpetuating the shit that's making it uncomfortable for the rest of us. But even that consciousness itself exists and has to exist in order to deal with these conversations, because you're still kind of wanting to see him in a respectful manner. And although we all have seen the video, we know damn well this man doesn't deserve any respect.
Like high road. We go high.
Yeah.
I'm trying to shout.
To add to what she just said, it goes back to what I said earlier when we were talking, when I said racism, when it comes to white people, it's an event, it's something that happened, and I'm sure Sioux Falls is looking at it like, oh my gosh, how could this happen? Here it was put it on the news, and a few days later the problem is done, and oh, we Sioux Falls people, we're very friendly, we don't do this around here and whatnot, but it's something that it's why that it's very important for us to have these conversations and to let you all know that this is something that's happening every day. And I hope everyone that's watching and everyone that's here can pick a thing or two and have these conversations with other people, and so that when you do see it happening, you'll be able to just at least inform or step in or do something. So it's something that we have to deal with every day. Unfortunately, it's just another, for us, it's just something, it's another white asshole.
That's on tape though.
Yeah, but
we got you this time.
In the comments, weren't there other stories about how this guy had did this other
Yeah.
too? So I mean, it wasn't anything new, it just was caught on camera.
So we have the evidence now to back up the story and the experience, and now this becomes not just a subjective thing. Like I heard from Sally, we heard from Sam, who's heard from John. No, I got this video that I can share. Now everyone can experience it in some way. And okay, I'm real glad that led to kind of a collective no thank you. But it's also possible that it could have backfired. Those kids shouldn't have been out on that street. They were taunting that guy. What about the other half of that video?
They do?
What's the other side of the story?
Reverse racism, and you can't dox people. It's like, no, you shouldn't be an ugly human being.
Well, and there were in the comments of him being mentally ill, and that's a thing that we have that come up a lot, that it's, and I think Regina too, you talk about white folks, we distance ourselves from it. We are not that bad. I am not using the N-word. I am not in the KKK. I am not, XYZ, but all that does is prevent us from examining the ways that we are, like, Jackson, normalizing it was a gentleman. I do things where, that hesitation to, oh, well, should I share this without getting more facts? Anything like that. We all have that. And, Danae even said, that internalizing it. We're exposed to media. We see these things. We hear these stories. When Regina was talking about her daughter, it was her daughter's friend whose dad said that this is what happens. It's always, black people when bad things happen. And being able to recognize it's all of us, and all of us have to do that work to unpack that internalized racism and work towards actually true equality, being aware of those things and saying, holy crap, there was this dude that was like being really racist, but how have I crossed the street when I saw, two young black men walking down the street? Have I locked my doors? Have I moved my purse to the other side? What have I done in examining those things instead of saying, those bad white people are not like me because I'm a good white person?
It reminds me of like hashtag activism. Oh, I retweeted that post, I've done my job.
Check
It's
mark.
over. And then I can go on about my day for that's the biggest thing that I've seen as a problem. What conversation followed that? Did they ask the two kids to come in and give their own experience? I mean, it was like a 30-second clip, but I mean, did they sit down with them and show the community, where these kids are coming from? How did they feel? I mean, those conversations don't follow, and that makes you lose credibility as in media, because you're just, like you said, checking off those boxes and think that that's all you need to do, but that's doing no service to anybody. And that leaves space open for people to say the negative things that are said. Like that's what happened to me. Like, oh, you were probably taunting the guy. Like, no. Like, listen to my background as to why I even knew to bring my phone in the first place. Like, I had a bad feeling from the start. So the hashtag activism, it's like, don't just say that you care, show that you care. How many people stood up for the kids? I mean, it's when you see it, do something. Don't just say that you care.
Yep.
I think
Okay.
that incident also perpetuates this theory that like the only racists are the ones who use the N-word. Like we're not, like, I can't believe we have those racists in Sioux Falls. And that must be the only way that we have racism in Sioux Falls is this one guy who uses the N-word, but we aren't thinking of these little, like, more subtle, like, the nice Midwest racism that's happening, like, probably worse than a lot of other places. Like, in people's homes where they're telling their kids, like, it's always the black people who commit the crimes, or, you know, just the microaggressions that happen all the time.
What's the date that girl I had a very elderly woman tell me once, since I work alone on 8th Street, close to the other side of the tracks. I mean, those are my words. And I was told, Angelica, you gotta be careful. You don't want those brown, yellow, red people coming by. And I just like, that's not what we call people. You know, like this race. I mean, I had to educate her, but she meant well, but it was definitely not there. You know, and she would never consider herself racist, but I mean, it is racism.
Yeah.
And
I was talking about the PTSD I suffered dealing with this Nate Phillips MAGA kid thing. It was bad. It was so bad. My phone was blowing up. I was getting death threats, emails, calls, all this stuff. I ended up getting kicked off the internet. I mean, I was getting trolled by all the KKK people or whatever. But by the end of it, I had completely immersed myself for 10 straight days on this story, and I've got a lot of the stuff that I do is crowdfunded. So I got flown out to DC and just thrown in, we found PR people and a couple of lawyers, all this stuff that we were doing. By the end of it, I was like, I'm so ready to go back to South Dakota. I was like, I just want to go home where like the racists will be racist but shake my hand at the same time. And that's really how it is around here. Because we all know someone we all know an Indian. We all know white people. But it's like you can grow up right next to someone, but just because they're your classmate, you assume that they're your friend. And it's unfortunate, but at the same time, I mean, that's what we're dealing with. I mean, you know, look at the way that the state party turned out for the Democrats. Look at the way the Republicans are playing the West River, East River thing. I mean, it's all South Dakota, but it all stems from racism, and it sucks. But
I'm not racist, I'm a black friend.
yeah, exactly.
I think we've got just a few minutes. Jenna, I saw your hand.
So that just kind of reminded me of something. Like, I'm adopted by white people, and so people in my family are like, oh, I'm not racist, I have a black cousin. Like, no, you still say the N-word, you still culturally appropriate stuff. That's racist. Anyways, so the video of the man in Sioux Falls kind of reminded me of a couple years ago at the fair. There was a white kid who called a black kid the N-word, and so the black kid like started fighting him, and everybody in the comment section was calling the black kid the N-word or just really derogatory names and like saying that he was a bad person, but when the white guy is saying stuff, it's like he's mentally ill. Yeah, but
Bigotry is not a mental illness.
No.
yeah.
You can be mentally ill and not racist. Regina?
Yes.
Oh, what was your name?
Sawyer.
Sawyer?
Yes. So it's interesting the way that you guys addressed, and I didn't see the video of the old man. But do you find it progressive to call him an old white asshole or just an old white man?
No, but it's
Do you
cathartic.
find that is helpful in bridging the gap between what we're trying to talk about and their stance by just giving them a label or calling them a name?
So I'm wondering why
Well, don't we
progressive,
want
I'm wondering why
equality?
you're using
Isn't
the
that
word
what-
progressive to begin with, and why you're stigmatizing the word progressive, and why progressive has to be put into it. What makes us dealing with racism, progressives. And that in itself it goes back to the language that people use to deal with these conversations. And it's offensive to you because maybe you have a little bit, and that, no, it is because you brought it up. And you saying that it doesn't is the defensive tactic. And maybe it's because, you yourself have a sense of family, a tribalistic system you belong to, where you know where the hell you came from. A lot of people that doesn't happen, and so they embrace the term white person more so than others because they don't know any better. But it's not, in a sense, but there's that normalization that we have to take on when it comes to these things, because it's the white people that perpetuate racism, not the people who know where they come from, not Irish Americans, European Americans, or whatever, who have embraced that culture themselves. So it's not. I don't want to further stigmatizing the word progressive, because I find that as a progressive person, as a progressive Democrat,
Okay, I
offensive.
apologize, I used the wrong word there. I'm just trying to say, is that helpful to bridge the gap between you and him and his situation, to call him names?
Do you mind? Would you mind?
Go ahead.
Is that okay? I mean, I don't
Yeah,
want.
that's fine.
Okay. So one of the things, Sawyer, right?
Yes.
Okay. That I think is really important to understand when we have these types of conversations. A lot of the times it's easy. There's actually a term for what you're doing now. It's called tone policing. And it's something that happens a lot with women of color, specifically when they have a valid reaction to something. What this old white man was doing was blatantly racist. And their response, and the response of the boys, who on video I think they were amazingly, but that's not something in and of itself indicative of anything, because it's important to remember, if they had done anything differently, they possibly could have ended up in a very bad situation.
I mean,
So
he said he had a gun.
yes. And so the responsibility for bridging that divide isn't on any of these panelists. The responsibility for that is on white men like you and Jackson and the other white men here. So if there is an issue with that, like finding that within yourself to understand where that emotional response is coming from, and not trying to challenge and change the way that they're responding to it, but to do that work yourself rather than requiring someone else to do that work. Does that make sense? Does that help with what, I mean, because I know a lot of the times, and I think, Allison, you talked about that, there's that emotional response, that defensiveness, because we do see ourselves in other white folks, and we want to distance ourselves, or how would we want to be? I want my hand held, and I want to feel okay, that I'm not a really bad white person. I'm not a bad person, right? And so being able to do that internal work is a part of the anti-racism unpacking process, and really getting towards that point where we are able to find that equality. So
I think it's also, like you said, it's important to validate our feelings toward this, because they're gonna be different than yours. When you hear that this guy went and did this, I mean, you might sense that, you might feel anger, but it's going to be a different anger than ours because of our experiences in our past. So
Empathy versus sympathy.
yes, and I mean, there's nothing wrong with you asking, and then I'm glad you brought that up, because like, I'm interested in bridging the divide with someone, for example, that has questions like you, that wants to learn and do better. But I don't have interest in bridging the gap with someone that says the N-word and has no desire to do better.
It's
And
not
so she had a
safe
gun.
for us.
Yeah, especially when they say they have a gun. I mean, that is not an inviting thing, and that's not a
Absolutely.
welcome thing. And I can tell you that he didn't want to know better. so there's a difference.
okay, I think we are coming up on 4:00. So I do hope, Sawyer, you signed in and you're interested in having more conversations. I'll give, I don't know if each of you just want to take like just a couple minutes, super short and succinct, just to be respectful of time. But I do really appreciate all 5 of you being here, everyone that showed up, and yeah, I'm deeply, deeply grateful for the conversation that happened in this room.